Hi, everyone. How are we doing today?
Doing well, thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, hi, Allison.
I see that our attendees are rolling in. I'm going to give them a moment before we get started with today's Lunch and Learn. All right. So welcome, everyone. My name is Allison LaForgia. I'm the Senior Webinar and Events Manager here at HW Media. Today's Lunch and Learn is about, are you factoring in Freddie Mac's latest appraisal modernization updates? And it's hosted by AppraisalWorks. A few housekeeping items before we jump into today's session. You can submit questions for the panel at any time by clicking on the Q&A icon on the bottom of your screen. We will also be recording today's Lunch and Learn. So if there's anything you want to go back and listen to again, you'll be able to see the recording in the email that will come out to all registrants. The recording will also be hosted on HousingWire's website. Now for today, our panelists are Ben Wyant, who's the Vice President and Product Owner at AppraisalWorks. And we also have Frank Winera, who's the Director of National Sales at AppraisalWorks. And we are also joined by Scott Reuter, who's the Chief Appraiser and Director of Valuation at Freddie Mac. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation.
So this Lunch and Learn has been a lot of fun for us to talk about, and it's been a lot of fun for me, even in the preparation. And that's because there's a lot going on in appraisals right now. In July, Freddie Mac rolled out the new ACE plus PDR offering, which is allowing lenders to originate certain refinance loans without an appraisal when a property data report is completed. There's several other modernization efforts going on and trends that I think are really important for our audience to know about and understand. And one of the notes that I thought was really exciting coming off of our prep call that I had underlined a couple of times is I felt like you guys really demystified appraisal modernization efforts, so I'm hoping that our audience gets the same takeaways that I did from our actual conversation. And with that, I want to jump into today's content, if that works for you guys.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Perfect. All right. So first, I want to start with talking about the offering that I just mentioned, the ACE plus PDR program, which went effective July 17th. Now, my first sort of question to start this conversation is, what's exciting about this new offering? Scott, let's start with you.
Yeah, well, what's not exciting about it, right? So we're very excited about it at Freddie Mac. It's the excitement, I think, is around a new way to look at valuation, and it's taking that property data piece, that property data collection, and accompanying it or informing a waiver. The ACE is our waiver offering. So I think it's a big step in modernization. And I think, you alluded and we talked on our prep call about, we think of, if you take a step back, we think of modernization kind of on a spectrum or a continuum from, waiver up to full traditional 1004 Form 70 appraisal work. And for a lot of years, it was kind of a binary world. You had one or the other. And really before waivers, we had one tool, and that was the full appraisal. And we track and monitor a lot of the appraiser capacity against volume, and there's a lot of tremendous pressure on appraiser capacity. And I think innovation in the ACE offering kind of ties back to addressing that in terms of really just offering lenders another option. And we're building out the spectrum with a desktop appraisal, and I would say very shortly, likely, hybrid offering, and really the landscape is wide open. So I think the excitement kind of ties back to the fact I think we're utilizing some of the advances in the emerging tools and technology to kind of couple and help inform, in this case, our waiver offer.
Yeah, I would second that. I think not only is appraisal modernization exciting, but just as an appraiser, this is probably the first major change in appraisal that I've been a party to probably 20 plus years. I'm dating myself now, but just to see the opportunity and the change happening in the industry is really exciting. I think it really gives all the constituents some relief over kind of the capacity constraints that we went through in 20 and 21. Granted, they're easing now, but really just a lot of excitement around appraisal modernization. And I think, to me, that really is the most exciting thing about what's happening here. And, with Freddie Mac leading the charge here.
Yeah, I would add real quick, a lot of to Frank's point, a lot of the advancement in our industry has really just been on the processing side, looking at software, looking at quicker ways to do the same process. This is it beginning to pivot and turn to a whole new way to begin to develop value. And I think that's what's tremendously exciting. And you look at not just the ACE plus PDR, you look at the desktop, you look at the hybrid, they're all kind of driven by that PDR, that property data report. And I think that, again, just conceptually is a whole new and different way to look entirely across how valuation is developed.
Yeah, and I think kind of to build on that too, and to reiterate your points, it's exciting just that appraisal modernization's finally happening. Like, we're seeing it finally, kick off and get started. And the other exciting aspect of that too is as we look at it from an entire industry-wide perspective, seeing all these stakeholders and industry partners kind of come together and take their interpretation of the approach forward and implement new tools and technologies to respond to it, and seeing how that's happening, it's certainly exciting to watch, and seeing the creativity and the ideas coming up out from it from a technical standpoint to help facilitate these tools for lenders.
I want to jump in and highlight a couple things that Ben just mentioned, but also Scott mentioned and Frank touched on, the addressing capacity. So the potential here, where is the potential to address future capacity concerns? Coming off of the past 2 years, there was really high capacity. So how do you think this factors into capacity in the future?
Scott, you want to maybe take the first crack at that? And
Yeah, I was going to jump in, Frank. So thank you. No, I think, we watch and track the capacity really month over month. And parenthetically, if listeners want to visit the Freddie Mac, the single family Freddie Mac /appraiser webpage, we have a variety of resources there, including our monthly update of the appraiser capacity. And if you take time and pull that slide down, I've shown it publicly a number of times, to your point, Allison, it shows about a static kind of number of appraisers we see submitting work to the GSE somewhere in the 38 to 40,000 appraiser range. And we've seen, particularly to your point, the past 2 years, look at that, tremendous pressure on that existing appraiser base. And you can see, well, Allison's on her game here. You can see the, in busy times, it puts a lot of pressure on appraisers to be able to respond. This shows the darker blue purchase volume shown, the vertical bars on the bottom. Stacked on top of that is the refi, and then again the amber or gold line shows kind of a rather static, number of unique licenses or appraisers that are submitting work. So the 2020 to 2021 volume, you see we had unprecedented submissions to the GSEs. I don't think prior to 2020 we had a month that was, I think 1 month hit 600,000 appraisals submitted. And I think during that 2-year period, I don't know that we had a month that was under. So I know we all lived that, and we're in a much different market now, but that's why we innovate. That's why we begin to introduce other product options and types. If we didn't have waivers, I'm looking at your graph, looking at the graph right now. If we didn't have waivers, I don't even want to think what this slide would look like with the crushing amount of volume that would have been on top of the appraiser's ability to keep up. It absolutely might have, not hyperbole, I might have seized the whole system. So I think, so you got a variety of things going on here, which we could digress on, which I won't. But I think, to your point, I think capacity is a big driver. I think it's a great backdrop to a discussion around appraisal modernization. And even as an appraiser, it's what keeps me excited about all options, even the options like this that you don't need an appraiser initially. An ACE PDR may require an upgrade to an appraisal. That's why appraisers need to care and understand. But again, there's lots of options across the spectrum that will include an appraiser and here's where I'll hand it back over to maybe Frank and Ben, is that the advances in technology are what going to help facilitate and make that very exciting, create options maybe we haven't even thought of today.
Yeah, I think it's what's also exciting about the capacity, play here is, yes, we've gained some capacity because the refi volume has gone down significantly, but that's only kind of a point in time. We're not going to stay here forever. And we do know that the population of appraisers is, the age of appraisers is increasing. So
Careful.
yeah, we're likely to revisit what we experienced in recent memory, and being able to create capacity with appraiser modernization, I think, is important for the entire industry to make sure it doesn't seize up. I think what's also important is it gives appraisers an opportunity to really, in my opinion, do what they do best, and that's analyze market data instead of driving around neighborhoods taking photos. And if you look at, if you, as an appraiser, if I factor in what I get paid per hour and not per job, that's a significant change. And it gives appraisers an opportunity to actually make more money per hour. We look at a lot of professions, right? Attorneys, you can look at, consultants. They all charge by the hour. Nobody charges by the form type, by the product, right? And they do that because you can make more money when you charge by the hour. So this is an important change, and I think everybody's now starting to understand that. But the capacity component is huge, and it's long overdue.
And that,
Yeah. Go ahead.
oh,
Ben.
sorry, go ahead,
Yeah.
Scott.
No, I was just going to throw another log on the fire there a little bit and say, I'm the son of an appraiser. I've been around appraisers all my life. If you ask an appraiser, and I'll throw myself in that group, that's not to point the finger, but if you ask an appraiser, there's never a good time to innovate. When you're busy, like we've been the past 2 years, you're head down and you're working, and you can hardly take a breath or drink or do anything. And then when it's slow, you wake up worried because it's slow, and you're like, oh my God, I can't bring on anybody now. So we don't think about kind of growing our business or any time to innovate or learn something new. But I think a down market is tough, but it presents other opportunities. And I think learning, adopting technology, new tools, new offerings, getting well-versed in being a provider of maybe a hybrid upgrade in this scenario or whatever is prudent. So Ben, I'm sorry, we jumped in at the same time.
No, that's fine. And not to veer from the appraiser perspective, but to briefly look at the flip side too, I think capacity ultimately has a trickle effect on a variety of other stakeholders in the transaction, and implementing appraisal modernization and enabling more capacity is ultimately going to lead to a better borrower experience too, which I think is tremendous and going to be very beneficial.
Yeah, let's not forget about the borrower in this whole thing, right? I mean, that's what it's good for where I sit now. We interact with a lot of our clients, which are lenders, and it's good for appraisers, to your point. But I think it's a great point. I think it's important for us to be reminded of the customer experience and the borrower, not only from a cost perspective. They're very sensitive to kind of the one-touch rates and one contact rates, and that's what's beautiful about the PDR in concept. You go out once to collect the property data. It's anticipated that the majority of the time that'll work as coupled with an ACE offering, and then during that busy time on the graph, you don't need to stand in line for an appraisal. You can go ahead and you can execute. And then if you do need to upgrade, you've already got the property data information. You just hand that to the appraiser, and then they can then upgrade that to an appraisal on a hybrid appraisal. So so I think just that came to mind. I think that's absolutely right. We need to be thoughtful of the customer experience and the borrower in this whole mix too.
So we mentioned data collection a couple times and the ability for this to allow appraisers not to act like data collectors. So who is eligible to collect the data for ACE plus PDR, and what is the training like for data collectors?
So I'll take the first crack at that, and Scott, if you want to backfill, but Freddie Mac did a great job in their, I think it's bulletin 13, correct, Scott? That identifies who can collect the data. And, data can be collected by non-appraisers, appraisers, appraiser trainees. But what Freddie Mac did a very good job at was outlining what the requirements were, what kind of training needed to be done in terms of sending out those non-appraisers, the appraiser trainees, and there's a litany of different requirements, one of which is to make sure that not only is the data collector trained, but tested, right? We're not just going to give them a pamphlet of information and say, good luck, right? It is training them how to measure a property and then testing them that they actually know what they're doing. The apps that we've built in conjunction with Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae walk data collectors through an entire inspection. I know with our app, the data collector can get upwards of 175 different photos from different angles. It prompts the data collector based on some of the answers to the questions that they're asked in the app around the different finishes and whether or not there are repairs. It opens up additional questions and requires additional photos. So there's a lot going on. And part of that is the training, right? And that is a requirement and something that needs to be done. I think the other key piece there, I know from our perspective, is making sure those data collectors are background checked, right? So we know who is entering a property. So all that is extremely important, and we've got great guidance from Freddie Mac in what we need to do and putting those guardrails around making sure that individuals are trained to be able to collect this data.
Yeah, well stated, and I've very little to add other than that was at least the design. Frank was kind with a compliment, but the desire was to not prescribe who, but to Frank's point, just to outline what the requirements are. We do have a guide bulletin. It is 2022-13. And there you can source the very things Frank was mentioning regarding what the training needs to incorporate. And we don't prescribe who provides that. Those just need to be the elements of the training. 1, 2, to Frank's point, we do require a background check. And so all that information, again, if you can just go out to, FreddieMac.com, I think ACE plus PDR FAQs, and they'll come right up. So there's links to a variety of resources, but that was the plan. The property data collector could be a non-appraiser third party. It can be an appraiser. It can be an appraiser trainee. Parenthetically, we're trying to work on bringing and attracting new folks to our profession. It would be a great way for an appraiser trainee to get a lot of hands-on experience, kind of work in a support role, work with an appraiser. They could work in a shop and do that. And that's really where like Frank and Ben and their and AppraisalWorks really shine. So yeah, that was the concept. And again, those resources are out there and available.
I would also add, and this gets back to the appraiser trainee and a good way to get new blood into the industry. This program, I think, really kind of bolsters what we've built on as an industry in terms of training appraisers. I know when I started, there wasn't a whole lot of training on how to really inspect a property. I mean, there was, but not to this level. And to me, that's the foundation of becoming a good appraiser, is understanding the collateral that you're out there to appraise, and having this technology and these types of training tools available to people that want to get into the industry, this is a great first step for them to understand the process, and knowing and understanding how to do an inspection of a property and what needs to be collected.
Yeah, and I think it also plays to their a younger trainee or even a mid-career, trainee, somebody who's coming into the profession. If you're kind of younger than me, you're going to be a little more adept at technology, and I think it's going to be a great way not only to integrate a lot of tools that can bring efficiency, bring a lot of much needed consistency, but I think it can be a great way to, again, really look at aspects of that and help drive innovation going forward.
So my next question, we just talked about the data collectors and ways to potentially get appraisal trainees involved and more involved from a training perspective, but how does this affect appraisers? How do the modernization efforts in general affect appraisers?
You want me to stick my neck out on this first, and then
Go
you
ahead.
go, or?
You can stick your neck out on it. I'm happy.
Yes. So
after you, because I think it impacts appraisers positively. So go ahead. I'll let you start. But
no, we can just go back and forth on this. So we didn't talk about this, but I think I know where Frank's going to land. I think it can be positive, and I think taking a step back, when I'm out talking to appraisers, not all appraisers, but there's a subset of appraisers who see appraisal modernization as appraiser elimination. So anything new is going to be negatively met, again, with some. But I think part of our goal, part of maybe our collective goal, is really to turn that paradigm to really look at it as an opportunity. So I think in a direct sense, how does like this offering impact an appraiser? I think we've kind of talked about that, right? If there's more information needed and the property data alone combined with our waiver information does not satisfy, or there's property conditions or site conditions that exist that require an upgrade, the appraiser can step right in. Again, we're going to tie back and talk about that graph a lot. Look at that graph. That's pretty much one gun in the arsenal, right? That's the 100470, and it's just not sustainable long term. And in addition to that, and I bump into Frank and Ben and even you, Allison, a lot of the same industry meetings. I mean, the industry demographics are what they are. They're just not tremendously flattering. So I think not the Institute, maybe it was the Institute and the Foundation on a combined study, somewhere in the neighborhood of 70% of appraisers are 55 or older. That's just a fact. So, on that line of appraisers that are probably still working and still busy, I don't know, if we project that line out 5 or 10 years, what's that going to look like from the existing appraiser base? And we still have a lot of challenges getting folks into the business with the current kind of apprentice and mentorship model. So I think all the use of these tools and being a property data collector, being a valuation analyst, being kind of a support role are great ways to attract young, bright talent into the industry, which we're going to vitally need. If we stay with what we're doing now, it's really not going to be potentially a very flattering outcome.
I also think it extends the longevity of an appraiser, right? Because if you think about it, again, at 65, 68, 70, you're probably, if you're in the Northeast, I'm in Cleveland, I don't know, at that age, I'm going to want to trudge through the snow and do inspections. I'm probably going to be a little bit slower at that whole process, but you take appraisal modernization and now you've just extended the career for a lot of appraisers, because they're analyzing the data. They don't have to contend with all of that, the issues that may come from driving all over the place, walking through yards, up and down stairs, whatever the case is, right? But it's an important piece because it does extend the career of appraisers. And it really gives them the opportunity. And I know everybody says retirement's great, but you hear a lot, people retire and what do? They go back to work. So I think this is so important just for the industry, and for appraisers in general, because it does extend their career. And I think that's important.
That's very astute. I think it's a real thing. I really, really do. And I hearken back to my dad. I think he would have stayed in the game longer if technology had kind of met that point in his life and career where he could have done a lot of desktop work. And it doesn't even necessarily need to be an age thing. I have an appraiser friend in Michigan, and same way, there's anything worse than Cleveland's going a little bit further north to Michigan. I went to Ohio State, so that's for a lot of reasons. But no, and I love Michigan. But yeah, you've got 2-3 bad days with a snowstorm. She says, I just sit, I stack up all my desktop work, and those are the days I stay in and keep my slippers on and stay warm and do those. So and it's not all or nothing, and appraisers don't need to just make a hard cut from doing full traditional work over to desktop. I envision they would like sprinkle it in their practice. It would be a part of what they do, and then they can manage it going forward that way. But anyway, tying back to your point, I think absolutely. I think it's going to keep a lot of appraisers in that demographic we spoke of in the game a little longer because it's going to be potentially attractive too.
Yeah, I think, and I'm certainly not an appraiser like you, Frank and Scott, but I think to your point, it's not, a strict cutoff. You can still do, the more conventional appraisal work as well. I think it provides a tremendous on-ramp, as we've already talked about, for new appraisers to get into the industry by doing the data collection aspect. And then, again, I'm not an appraiser, but I view this coming out of, a global pandemic. It's kind of like the work from home option for being an appraiser. So, it's a good option to have in your tool belt and be able to still work, but not have to leave your house when you don't want to.
That's a really good point, Ben, because there is a huge demographic that wants to work from home. We experience it here, just trying, to get new employees. There's a group that wants to work from home. This is the ultimate work from home job. So to get young, college educated entrants into this that want to work from home, God bless. There you go. Here it is.
It's me. Yeah. I'm the person who wants to work from home, who left the East Coast so that they didn't have to drive through snow and could work from home.
Well, and think about it too. You're all younger than me, but I mean, it's if you're a parent, and you have kids, you can plan your day. You can plan your day to be home when they get off the bus, or you can be involved in their life at school more because you're in control of your schedule. Now, you may the trade-off there is you may have a couple nights a week you're up late, finishing reports or whatever if you're working for yourself, but it does give you that ability. And I've talked to a lot of people, particularly a lot of women, which is interesting, that they were like, I gravitated to this career because I wanted to be a mom and I wanted to be, there with my small children and be able to, be home when they were home and be out when they're out. So I think it's vitally important.
So one thing I wanted to mention before I move on to the next question, Danny unfortunately couldn't be here with us today, but something that he mentioned in the prep call was that he thought that this was really going to allow appraisers to focus on their expertise. And the analogy that he used was that when you go to a doctor's office, it's not the doctor who's coming out and taking your blood pressure and your temperature and getting all of the metrics that they need in order to then prescribe medication or even alternative life changes, things like that. They're not doing that data collection piece. So before we move on to the next question, do you think that that's one of the efforts with this, that you have the option to remove appraisers from having to go and collect the data?
I'll go first. I think absolutely. And I love that analogy. And it's true. We don't think, Frank mentioned, kind of challenging appraisers in a way to think in an hourly concept. And I think there's a lot of applications we can bring into our industry. And that's a great one. I loved when I knew you were going to ask that because your eyes lit up on our prep call. That was like, I really like that. But it is true. We have to get to the point where we don't think we have to do everything start to finish, which is, open up the file, do the field work, pick the comps, drive out, look at this, take all the pictures, do all the assembly. To borrow an appraisal term, I don't know if that's our highest and best use as an appraiser. we've all gone through a heck of a lot of training to get our current, licenses and certification. And I think if you think of it like an assembly line where you set up and start a file, you do the data collection, and then you complete it with the analysis, I really want my appraiser here for sure. It can do everything, but you kind of overlay capacity and you overlay where they're at, and maybe bringing some other support online. We collectively should open our mind to be able to, utilize that information and really just do the analysis. And I think the doctor analogy is great. You don't see the doctor till the very end. So we can begin to think of ourselves and our work process in kind.
Danny made a great point in our pre-call, was that nothing in USPAP says the appraiser has to go out and inspect the subject property, right? But we've been conditioned because that's what the form says, right? So the form, meaning the 1004, the 70, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've been conditioned that way. So that's what we do. But now with appraisal modernization, we've taken it and said, Mr. and Mrs. Appraiser, we want you to do the analysis. That's really what we need from you. And again, I get back to Scott's point that it's probably not the highest and best use to have the appraiser driving all over the place, snapping comp photos and doing that sort of thing. The highest and best use for the appraiser is to do the analysis of the data. That's what we need appraisers to do. And this appraiser modernization is not a moratorium to get rid of the appraiser. It's let's just focus what we really need the appraiser to do. I kind of look back years ago when AVMs were first starting to hit the industry, right? The big scare was, oh no, AVMs are going to put all the appraisers out of business. I think we can all agree that never happened. And I don't foresee that happening here. I just think it's we're gonna really hone in on what the highest and best use of our time is.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, and I think there's another element too, that not only that USPAP does not require an inspection explicitly, I think it ties back to data. The reason that started even early in my career, and probably through my dad's entire career, that was the only way you were going to gain information about the subject property or anything happening in the market, was to actually physically get out there and collect it or drive around. Now, with the advent of data, big data, the advancement in tools and tech, and I mean, they're changing as we're all having this conversation. It's been a while since I've been in the field and on the front end of the business, but it's my understanding it's almost laughable to somebody my age, the amount of inbound information that comes in with an order. Back in the day, it was an address and you sent it out to the appraiser and then you waited, like, ooh, I wonder what it is. Now it's ridiculous. Here's all this. Here's the last 3 transfers. We know it's a 2-story. We know it's here. It's like, here's all this. And then probably in your systems, it's, here's all this, here's possible data. I mean, the appraiser is so rich in data that I just think on, beginning with again, kind of overlaying this big step on modernization, let's utilize all that information, and for maybe a portion or subset of loans initially, maybe on the lower risk end of the spectrum, let's use that. If that's enough information for the appraiser, kind of tying back to Danny's point, he's a true USPAP expert. I mean, you don't need to you need to gain the information and be knowledgeable on the characteristics and enough information to develop the report. But that does not say you, Frank, have to drive out to that property and collect it yourself. So I think data is as big a piece in that whole equation and that whole discussion.
And there's so much of it out there. We're almost weekly talking with companies that are data aggregators, or they're leveraging AI to be able to analyze photographs, interior, exterior. There's satellite imagery. To Scott's point, there is so much available data for an appraiser now. You really, by and large, have a very good indication of what you're stepping into when you get the order, because of all the available data that's out there online. So again, it's nice to see the industry catching up finally with technology a little bit.
I think to both of your points, it's not about removing a portion of the workforce or the process. It's about making it more efficient. And, certainly bifurcation's been around for quite a while. It's definitely been used in, different verticals. But I think, and maybe Frank, you know better than I, but at the end of the day, it ultimately allows you as an appraiser to complete more reports. And the more reports you complete, the more you can make, and the better quality your reports can be, the more time you have to spend on them. So
yeah, the desktops and hybrid appraisals have been around for decades in home equity.
right.
Is it new? We've done it for 20 years in home equity and in servicing. So it's not new. It's new to mortgage for sure. But again, I think part of that is because again, the forms that we had for mortgage and the securitization and that sort of thing, but now we're moving beyond that. And I think the industry as a whole is really starting to embrace it. But we've got a long way to go, without a doubt.
Yeah, and I think you're right. And until, and all of us, I mean, until Fannie and Freddie give it a nod, it's going to be hard to get broad adoption. And I think we learned, as awful as COVID was, we learned through COVID, we learned a few things. One, we learned we could continue to do business, which was vitally important. And two, we learned through the introduction through our COVID flexibilities of both desktop and exterior only options, that not only was it efficient and the wheels of commerce, so to speak, could keep working, but those product types didn't really introduce any additional or new risk. So it was like nobody wanted any of this to happen, but that inflection point taught us a lot. And I would speculate that was a big contributor to, we'd already been thinking about a variety of different options as it relates to, in this case, desktop specifically, but yeah, just looking at other ways that we could do to do appraisal and work and valuation, and again, coupled with the amount of data and the the absolute abundance of data that we have now. And I remind appraisers all the time, and that an appraisal helps inform a risk decision. That's really what an appraisal does. And if there are other ways with this abundance of data, with this technology, with ways we can harness our models and submodels to work along with all this property condition and data information, there are going to be a portion of loans that I think we're going to be able to satisfy the information needed to make the risk decision with those tools. Then as you kind of go up the spectrum in complexity, you have unique properties, rural, heterogeneous markets that don't trade frequently. I mean, there's a whole big portion of the country where you're going to need an appraiser because there's just going to be a lot of data challenge. I think that's the good news part of the story for appraisers that are kind of worried, is that I think there's enough complexity and enough unique property characteristics across most of this country that I think there's absolutely going to be a need. But for, we're here in the DC area, I use the Dulles corridor all the time as an example. If you go from McLean, Virginia, where our offices are, out to the Dulles airport, Reston, there's a lot of communities out there where a lot of builders, a lot of volume builders went in and put thousands and thousands of units and townhomes, and a lot of similarity. So you have a lot of property similarity, they're homogeneous, they trade very frequently. There's not a lot of variation. There's usually, a few models, some of the basements, some are end units, but models can really consume all that data and do a very good job in terms of helping us inform us on a loan decision if you're not pushing LTV limits. And there's just all that information. So again, on a busy time, even hearkening back to the slide, and when the bars are just blowing through the appraiser's capacity to keep up, are we really being prudent? And it's a question, are we really doing the responsible thing to make a borrower stand in a long line for a full appraisal, even though an appraiser can do that, when there may be other options and other ways we can do business. So I think that's also a very important part of this discussion.
So you just introduced a point that I want to make sure we cover before we run out of time today, since we're starting to get into the back end of things. You mentioned that the intention is informing a risk decision. So something that I've seen on my end in conversations is that some of the apprehension in adopting tech in this space is really the question of the QC process and how this offering might differ, or modern, or even desktops, where QC comes into that process. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on how the QC process is done, especially with this new offering, and how you would sort of dispel any myths or misconceptions that might exist about that.
Yeah, so I'll start from the QC perspective, right? So QC plays such an important role in appraiser modernization and the data collection process. First, and probably foremost, we as a provider have to not only provide ample data to the appraiser around the characteristics of the subject property, the condition, the square footage, but we have to provide good quality data that has been QC'd, and not just you look at it, but we leverage outside tools. We can tell just from a satellite image. You can go and look at, you see all these Google driving around neighborhoods, taking photos. We can tell if we've got the right property in the QC process. But we want to make sure that we're providing good quality data to the appraiser, because if the appraiser doesn't have any confidence that the provider that's giving them the PDR has given them good quality data, as a provider, we're not going to be able to provide the service, because we don't have the key piece of the workforce, which is the appraiser, because the appraiser doesn't have any confidence in us. So from our perspective, QC has probably never been more important. We QC 100% of what we send out. But the important thing is we can, through technology, we can start the QC process when the data collector is actually leaving the property. The data collector is submitting this information to us on their way out the front door or from the curb, so we can accelerate that process. But QC is probably more important than it's ever been, because you have to make sure you're given good quality data. It's not only, it actually introduces 2 points of QC. There's 1 point of QC from the property data collection perspective. And then if it goes to a 70H, to have an appraiser put the 1004 together, there's another point of QC, because we're going to QC that again. So it's a very important piece. And Ben, I don't know if you've got, from a technology perspective, anything you wanted to put in to that conversation.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. I think it's a really important aspect to the process, being able to not only perform it, but memorialize it and show that you did perform a review and give the appraiser a good quality report. But I also think of QC on a broader scale. QC of a report is kind of a snapshot, but if you take the holistic view and look at all of the orders and be able to track performance metrics based on the providers. So like I look at bifurcation a little bit like a group homework assignment that you're doing in college, and you got a group and you want to make sure that all the people on your team are judged separately in a sense. So I mean, if you're building out a panel of property data collectors and you're working with your existing appraisers, you want to understand where in that team is the performance slipping, or where is it great, and how can you make your process more efficient to empower both ends, both stakeholders, to do a great job, and really you're partnering them together in a sense. So being able to track that performance metrics of the QC process, not just the completeness of the report, but the quality of the report, I think it's a very important aspect of it, and having the technology help you do that.
Yeah, and I'll just add in closing, those were 2 great comments really from their side of the house, and very vitally important. And there are levels of lender responsibility across the board, whether you're doing a full appraisal or whether you're in this space. And we've detailed out, in some of our FAQs, what some of the lender responsibilities are when they're reviewing, to start with the PDR. So there are non-qualifying, our system may through LPA return a ACE plus PDR eligibility message, but there could be something in the subject property condition, characteristics, or site characteristics that will not qualify. And that's where we really have to rely on our lender friends and appraisal providers to be those eyes to ensure that they're assessing the information, looking at the photographs to determine if any of those characteristics exist, and being ones really kind of driving that part of the process to determine if they need to upgrade or whether everything appears sufficient in the property data as it was returned, coupled with the ACE decision.
So now a question I want to as I think we have 15 minutes left. This went by really quickly. So one question that I really want to get each of you to jump in on is, how do you see adoption of appraisal management technology and when you're looking at these processes, and how do you see it impacting the availability of these offerings for lenders?
Yeah, I could jump in there first if you want. I certainly want to get the group's take. And Scott, I know during our prep call we talked about this a little bit, but I think the overarching thing to consider here is that this isn't the end. This isn't the final solution. There's going to be more to come. There's going to be more changes, more solutions, more ideas, more innovation, and ultimately, from my perspective, thinking about it in technology, it always boils down to how quickly can you react and how flexible can you make your technology to react to changes, workflow changes, new products, new requirements. So I think ultimately implementing technology that is flexible and working with partners that you trust and that understand these things is really a key component. But from my viewpoint, I've seen all these technical components fit together quite nicely. I mean, I think everybody's working well together, to put it nicely. And I think appraisal management technology, in a sense, is going to kind of grease the wheels for some of these things, setting lenders up so that they're able to have access to providers that can fulfill these reports and actually be able to place an order for them at the end of the day. Because it's one thing to understand what it is and to want to do it, but to actually be able to push a button and place an order for it is completely different.
Yeah, I have a lot of conversations with lenders, and the one key takeaway is every lender wants to do something a little bit different to give themselves a competitive advantage or create operational efficiency. And it's important for the lender to work with a management technology that can customize, configure quickly to adapt to their needs for their operation, for their borrowers, for whatever the case is. And it doesn't matter which lender, how big, how small, but everybody wants to do it a little different. And it's incumbent on the platforms to be able to quickly make those changes and not have to do extensive development projects, because that tends to slow things up. But from an appraisal management perspective, lenders, at least from my conversations, are looking for providers that can quickly enhance, configure, and deploy their technology to meet their custom needs. Nobody's the same. Everybody wants to do it a little different. And that's where I think the good providers separate themselves a little bit from the pack.
Yeah, I think both great comments, and I'm glad Ben was paying attention during our prep session. So we did say we weren't done innovating, and that's a great tagline, because we're not. And I think it would be inappropriate, fully disingenuous, whatever, to develop ACE plus PDR and desktop and go, well, that appraisal modernization was awesome, now we're moving on. I think it's going to be a landscape we're in for for, going forward, period. And you're right. I think I heard you say, I think technology is really going to drive the train, so to speak. I think it's going to be those advances. We're already seeing it happen, for goodness sakes, in the past year, just what technology will enable. The great news from my perspective is the GSE door is now open. We're actively looking to try to innovate, incorporate a lot of these tools and technology. And I think to adoption and maybe how some of these products come out the gate, whether they stumble a little bit, whether they have low adoption, high adoption, or whatever. I also think that's what innovation looks like, right? I think it just takes a while for the industry, for the infrastructure, for technology, for the various companies. And I don't want to get outside my lane here, but that's really, Frank, where you and Ben are, experts in terms of the business strategy and how to think of this and being able to support it. And, some may have the technology piece, but they might not be a great fit for ACE PDR because they don't have that seamless upgrade to an appraiser when they need to go to a hybrid. And there's a lot to think about. And there's a lot of bright minds that on the business side that I think help bring all that together. And but I think, again, tying back, I think that's what innovation looks like. We bring it out, we make it an offering, we develop the specs, we partner with good folks like you, we keep an eye on the technology. We've got a little dance we need to do. We've got a regulator who we have a great relationship with, but they play a vital role in ensuring what we do and the various different product offerings. Certain things we'll do in lockstep with our friends across the river, like we did the desktop. Other things, innovation might be at a GSE level, very specific. So anyway, I think to me, it's nothing but exciting. I was asked recently, what's the one thing I get excited about? And I said, I think it's the emerging tools and tech. And it's because of what it enables. And in all those places across the spectrum, whether they're down more towards the automated and more tech heavy side, and how pieces that can help inform automation, or as you move up, more appraiser options. And again, to kind of allay the concerns of our appraiser friends, I've said many times, if you bifurcate an appraisal, Ben, which you mentioned, if you a hybrid appraisal, a desktop appraisal, up to a full traditional 1004 Form 70 appraisal, all need an appraiser. So there's a place for an appraiser across a wide part of the spectrum, and just those particular different product innovations and offerings are going to be different ways that the appraiser develops the appraisal. And again, you couple that back and you overlay that on the appraiser capacity slide during busy times. I think there are real options that are going to help. They're going to help the appraisers not lose their mind trying to stay up with all this business, and they're going to help lenders be much more efficient in working with their customers and their borrowers. And I just think it's a better answer and far more sustainable across the board for the industry.
So I think one of the interesting things for me has been that the recent offerings like desktop for purchase and ACE plus PDR have started to fill in the gray space from where you had the waiver and then the full appraisal traditionally. So one of my questions would be, with the ACE plus PDR offering, and we touched a little bit on this during the QC question, is there, I know sometimes with technology or new offerings, there's always are we stuck in this sort of aspect? If we start to go down this route, do I have to keep going with this? If there are things that come up during that process, like adverse property condition, etc., is there the option in that offering to upgrade to a full appraiser where you really need that expertise and the boots on the ground person?
Yeah, I'll go first. If I heard you right, we had a huge ladder wagon go by blowing whistles. I've muted. So I think I heard most of that. But yeah, that's absolutely why we have the upgrade option, if that's what you're asking, right? So there's a whole, you go to our published FAQs, you go to the 2022-13 bulletin. It kind of details out the various things that would require an upgrade. And some are some are condition related, some are site condition or adverse site condition related, and some are property related. I don't have them all memorized. If it's like a subject property less than 400 square feet, or that a property that literally has no bedrooms, or there's something anomalous or pretty extreme about the property, you're going to need to upgrade that to an appraisal. But I think a variety of what we're doing here too is a way to just learn from what we're doing as we collect all this information. And I think, if we see and course correct. So I think the one thing we've done, we didn't come out the gate and say, you're going to love this, it's done. It's like, well, look, here's we've published our property data collection specs, and here we are comfortable with, as an offering, combining that information with our ACE waiver in a certain portion here. And as we learn more, if 90% of them get upgraded, I think that's a signal that maybe we're not there. We're hearing anecdotally it's very low. So I mean, I think those are things we're going to learn along the way and help really perfect the offerings and maybe inform new offerings. So that's what's tremendously exciting.
And I think it's also, from the putting myself on the lender's side of the table, working with a provider that can provide that upgrade path seamlessly, right? So if it starts out with PDR, and for some reason, as Scott said, whether it's property characteristic or location, and it needs to get upgraded, can your provider upgrade it quickly to the next product, whether that's a 70H or a full 1004? So making sure, if as a lender, you have providers that can really get you that full spectrum of valuation products and upgrade paths through various different trees that you need to get through. That's an important piece. Again, if I'm sitting on the lender side of the table, working with somebody that can help me navigate that upgrade path, that's an important piece to look at.
And I would speculate, again, I'm way outside my lane here, but I would speculate building that infrastructure is not a small task. In other words, the upgrade to an appraiser requires an appraiser in that market who has geocompetency too. It's not just rolling it through to a staff appraiser. So I think behind the whole ACE PDR and that potential upgrade to the 70H is a cadre of appraisers on a pretty good footprint nationwide who can handle that. So you're not walking them through the first hybrid appraisal and you're going to get pushback, and then that's going to translate to time and everything else. So I really tip my cap to AppraisalWorks and other companies that are putting a lot of thought and time into developing kind of the broad network, because that's what's really going to appeal to the lender, right? They're going to be able to have that seamless experience. And trust me, even though I'm an appraiser and I poured a lot of my heart and soul into appraisals, I learned pretty quickly, lenders, our dear lender friends, lenders would move away from appraisals in a heartbeat if they could. It's just a lot of times they can't. So when they have to, let's make that handoff collectively as seamless as it can be, as painless as it can be. And the whole spirit of taking that property data component piece and handing it to the appraiser is to take a lot of field work and time off their plate. They still have a tremendous amount of work to do. Developing that appraisal is no small task. And they'll spend more time at the computer screen here, gathering information and pulling a lot of online resources and looking at utilizing and verifying data, maybe pulling down aerial photography. None of that's an insignificant lift maybe per se, but it's not driving to the other end of town and spending a couple hours of field work in the car. So
yeah, I think it's network and technology or an environment for your providers, whether they're property data collectors or appraisers, a technology platform that's user-friendly, that they're able to work on. So having the network, but having a technology platform.
And Ben, do you have anything you want to add in before we wrap?
No, I won't belabor the point any further. I think that's exactly right. You need all the constituents, but you need technology to put it all together.
So with that, that's a nice little bow for me. We are almost at the top of the hour. So Ben, Scott, Frank, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope our audience enjoyed this as much as I did. It's been really fun to even plan this conversation, but I want to thank you all for sharing your insights. Really, really, really insightful conversation. And to our audience, if there are any questions, that we did not get to during the live conversation. We will be passing the questions over to the panel, so you will get those answers to the questions that you submitted. And hopefully you all join us again soon.